The death of Hulk Hogan. So Bubba the Love Sponge claimed some weeks ago that the reason Hulk Hogan had stopped doing publicity for Real American Beer and the Real American Freestyle Wrestling, etc., was that he was at death's door, and he was just very confused, not in any condition to be in the public eye, quote, and that he also may have been in a coma. He was coming out with all these different things, and I think a lot of people are eye-rolling because, it's from Bubba the Love Sponge, who was the guy who secretly filmed his former best friend engaging. How would you politely say it? Coitus.
What's that word?
How would you politely say what Bubba the Love Sponge purposely filmed Hulk Hogan and his wife engaging in to extort money from him in the future?
He literally screwed Hogan. Because, and I mean, I hated when that happened. I really did. And Bubba the Love Sponge, in Tampa, he's not held in high regard. He was a shock jock back in the early 2000s, I guess, where he would say outlandish things, but I never listened to him because I wasn't in Tampa at that time. But those shock jocks, to me, they wear thin quickly, and you've heard about they can shock people, so you're done with them. So I never really listened to him, but I did see him, in some kind of advertisement for something he was doing. But he was the type that puts me off immediately, because all he's going to do is just say outlandish things and make outlandish claims. And when he came out and said that Huck was on his deathbed, I didn't believe that. Nobody else did either. But he did it because he wanted to get some clicks on that dying career of his. And I guess he got some. But even a blind person is right about the time twice a day. He can't see the clock, and he was right about Hogan, but I think he was just making that up anyway. But regardless, he is what he is.
That's interesting because we don't know how much he was making up and we don't know how much was true, because there's going to be some conflicting things here. Right, so once again, no one particularly seemed to believe Bubba at the time. But then it was getting suspicious that Hogan had been seen out about in weeks and weeks. Later, it was then revealed that he was in hospital for neck surgery that didn't go as well as hoped. 2 weeks before Hogan had died, Hulk Hogan's wife, Sky, went on the offensive to say that Bubba's claims were false and gave another explanation for Hogan being out the limelight. So essentially, she said, I won't read the entire thing. He was having serious neck surgery, long and layered healing process, affects the vocal cords, eating and breathing tubes that are clamped over during surgery. With Stevie Richards, who also on the WSI network I do a show with, his voice has been affected permanently because he's had 2 neck surgeries and it affects the vocal cords as well, because he sounds markedly different now than he does in the 90s. And then she says, they're taking it one day at a time, healing, love, strength, and patience, etc. Then, less than 48 hours before Hogan passed away, Jimmy Hart posted the following: Hulk is doing great, doing phenomenal. Last night at karaoke with Nick was absolutely fantastic, baby. Now, shunting those 2 sentences together, it sounds like Hulk Hogan was at karaoke, but he wasn't. It's just too...
Right.
It's a run-on kind of thing where it's, I guess, made to make you think that, I suppose. Maybe. And then the... 1 second, I'm sorry, I've got to go to the next page. And then TMZ reported that 71-year-old wrestling legend Hulk Hogan had been battling health issues since May, passed away. It ended up fire and police personnel responded to Hogan's Clearwater home at 9:51. He was declared dead at 11:17 a.m. Eastern. That was...
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
When you heard about this, what was your reaction?
I was interviewing somebody for a job, and I just kept getting it because I was doing it on my phone because I've got no internet. Just kept getting notification after notification after notification. So, I mean, total disbelief. Because I don't know, there's certain people you just assume are just going to be there forever. I know no one's there forever, but I just didn't think that Hogan was that sick or have felt like he wasn't, I mean, where were you when you got the news, and what was your reaction?
It shocked me. It really did. And I didn't know him that well. And we'll talk about this later. but I was around in the early days, almost his starting days. He was in Florida. I was in Florida and used to make trips with him. I'll save this story for later on. But it shocked me because sometimes you think that somebody is there forever. And when that news came across, I went, wow. And I can't describe the feeling, but it really, because I really liked him. You know, regardless, they tried to destroy his reputation at the end, some people, but I liked Tuck, and it shocked me when I heard about his death.
So, after the fact, Jimmy Hart gave an interview maybe a couple of days before we record this on Tuesday, saying that he'd been told the day prior to Hogan's death that he was in really good health considering, and that he was well on the road to recovery. So we still don't know, once again, how true Bubba's claims were that he was in a coma or he was on his deathbed or whatever, because I think for everybody who was close, and I think only Jimmy Hart has said this publicly, is that he was actually on the road to recovery and then he just had a heart attack
Yep.
and died. So we don't know how true, if at all, Bubba's claims of, you know, comas and whatnot were true. I'm sure that'll all come out in the, you know, intervening weeks and months, I guess. Now, we'll go through his career. So where was the first time you met Hulk? Was it in Memphis or was it even earlier?
Oh, he was in Tampa here in Florida, in the Florida territory. And I'm thinking, see, I started like 72, 73. I don't want to date myself, but you know, anybody can say, damn, that's some bitch is old. But anyway, I think it was like 76, 77. And he was just starting here. And I used to take trips with him, and he was he was big like he is now, but just not as, you know, and he's been more cut up in his training, and but he just had really the sheer size then. He was actually bigger up close than what you saw him from a distance. And he'd probably only had like, other than training, and you never have like a match in training. You have bits and pieces of a match is what you have. But I remember I would make the long trips with him because in Florida, everybody locates bases out of Tampa or that area. And Miami was like 275 away. And then Jacksonville, the other way, was like 220 and on a Thursday. And then you'd come back to Tampa, and on Friday you'd go to Tallahassee, which was about 240. So if you add those up, that's about 500 miles a day just to those towns. And that adds up to 1,500 miles. You could easily do in Florida, you could easily do 2,300 miles a week, which is a lot of miles if you're just traveling to get there and get back. So, but that's where I met Hulk, had a lot of conversations with him. And I've been reading about, did you read about his brother?
Yeah,
That was
he
a
was,
big
wasn't he
guy
like head of
too.
a chapter of the Hells Angels or something? He was the father of
Yeah, something like that.
Horace Hogan, for people who
But
don't know.
well, riding with Huck, he never even told me about his brother. I didn't even know he had a brother, to tell you the truth. And he explained to me how he got in and how tough it was. And his trainer was Hiro Matsuda. And he was a really, really tough guy. Really. Because he wasn't overly big. He's probably 210, 220, maybe. And we'll talk about this a little later, what they call the snake pit. They would take them down there to try them out, guys that were loud mouths and smart asses, and they would take them down to the office where they actually filmed their TV there, a little studio. And it was called the snake pit because once they got them in there, they had them. And they would literally rip these aspiring they wanted to be wrestlers. They just didn't know how to go about doing it. And they would just take them in there and just stretch them. And they have been reports of some wrestlers actually running out on the street yelling, "Help me, help me." And the police stopped one and they picked him up, brought him back. And the police come to the door and they knew what was going on in there because they would come by that office and check in sometimes. And they went to the door and they said, "We have a gentleman out here in the car that says you guys are trying to kill him in here." They said, "Oh no, we're just training. He's just a wuss." And the police laughed and they said, "All right, go on back in there." And he didn't want to go. They said, "Oh, come on in, you know." And they drug him back in there and closed the door. And the police drove off. I mean, they would really, really. I mean, it was brutal what they did to some of those guys, which I didn't really agree with, because now you couldn't do that stuff because they'd sue the hell out of you.
Mm.
But back then, I mean, that was nobody even thought about suing anybody because that made you less than a man, I guess. But anyway, but Huck, he was drug in there a few times and stretched because they had the personnel to do it. They had Matt Suda, they had Bob Roop, and they had a few more that were like, I mean, just really, really good at wrestling shoot style. So once you were drug in there, and if you know anything about wrestling, if you'd see that lineup, you'd say, "Oh, no, I think I'll have to skip today's session and leave." But the guys, you would almost get yourself an invitation when you would say things like, "Oh, it's all fake. It's all this, it's all that." That almost guaranteed you, if you wanted to go and volunteer to go, that almost guaranteed you an invitation to come and train with us. And they used it to say, "We'll train with you and see if you have what it takes to be a wrestler." Because that's what they wanted anyway. They wanted to get into the business. So they take them down there and just beat the hell out of them. Brutal.
Hogan would claim that his leg was broken in his first minute of like the first training session with Hero Matsuda, and then he'd have to heal up, and then 6 weeks later he'd turn back up, and they'd eventually train him. I'm going to get back to like some of the road trips you had with Hogan in the early days.
Yep.
But he was about to leave wrestling at one point. He wasn't catching on at all, at least the first couple of years, until he probably got to Memphis or something like that. Maybe not even Memphis. Maybe it's when he first went to Japan, but like for 2 or 3 years. And I think this is like in Dr. D. Dave Schultz's book, where Dr. D claimed that he had to basically talk him into staying with wrestling because good things are just around the corner. But it was a real brutal existence.
Where did David run in? Where did David run into him? Minneapolis?
Tennessee, most likely, or somewhere around there. Who knows?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe.
Yeah, so it's probably when he got to the WWF, Hogan realised there was big money to be made when he was working your Gorilla Monsoons and Andre the Giants and such. But until then, he didn't really want to be in the business that much, especially, with the low pay that the Fullers and whatnot, I guess, were paying comparatively.
Well, that's the story of the business. I mean, the ones that stayed with it were the ones who were loyal, and the ones who were really, really wanted to get into the professional wrestling profession. And see, wrestling in those days was nothing. It wasn't even a snapshot of what wrestling is today.
I think in an earlier episode, you told me that Hogan, when you used to make the trips with him, you just said Hogan would not stop talking about himself.
No. He was. You could tell it was all about Hogan. So I just sat back and listened to it because he was kind of entertaining after you've heard a story 3 times, and 4th time he told it, and he would almost tell it verbatim. I mean, there was no variation between one story last week and the same story this week. But I enjoyed traveling with him. Good guy, and I liked him. And usually it was just me and him on a trip. And a lot of times, and I would go with Hope because he would take his car. I love that.
Mm.
You take your car, you do the driving, and I'll listen to you. Okay. That's a pretty good swap off, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
And
I was going to ask, when was the last time you bumped into Hogan? Was it in Memphis with Brutus
no, it was
Beefcake, or
in
were you not there?
TNA.
In TNA.
TNA.
It's funny how, you two worked that many years, and there was like a 25-year gap or something between you two bumping into each other again.
He remembered me, and we talked for a little bit, and but he was coming in, and I was going out. Because him and Eric Bischoff came in, and it's like when somebody else is, you get a new manager in a business, in civilian life, I call it. Well, they're going to bring their people in. So if you're in some kind of a supervisory capacity, which I was, he wants his own supervisors, and I don't blame him. But there in TNA, that's a whole nother story. That's not even the wrestling business, really. It was something masquerading as the wrestling business. Mm-hmm. But that's where I met him. And I met Eric Bischoff. I don't know. I was on a plane with him maybe 5-6 years ago, and we talked. We talked briefly, not about TNA, of course, but we were just talking about wrestling in general. And he was a nice guy. But I had worked under him in Atlanta. And what year was this?
That would have been 91.
It's in the 90s, yeah. Mm. And he was assuming his duties there. So, and it made, hey, the guy who really, I never expected Hogan. When you first meet him, you don't expect these guys to be as big as they got. I mean, that would take a fortune teller and a good one. But I could see that he had the personality, he could talk, and he had the body, and he had the blonde hair. He had all that stuff. So I could see him becoming a big star because now you have something to work with. So anybody in creative can look at him and say, and they tell another member, we might have something with this guy. And so, but everybody's giving Hulk most of the credit, which he deserves, and rightfully so. But when you put him with a creative genius like Vince McMahon, I mean, he's been around the business all his life. And when you put those two together, they couldn't miss because Vince knew that if you're going to have a big, big star, you got to make them a big, big star. And, thinking back on, my years in the business, I think Memphis did this the best of any smaller territory in the country because they made stars.
And so using the Rock and Roll Express as an example of how to get somebody over in a territory, Hogan had the same thing going for him when he went back to the WWF in very late 1983, and then he wins the title within a couple of weeks of him returning. And obviously you're not going to be, watching everybody else.
When did he go to WWE? In 83, you said?
Right, okay, so originally it was still the WWF, so it would have been 79, 80, and then he goes and does Rocky 3, he gets fired because of it, and then he plies his trade in the AWA, makes a huge success of himself. Vern Gagne doesn't want to give him the big belt because he won't marry one of his daughters or something. He wants to keep it in the family, I guess. So then Hogan goes back to the WWF in December of 1983. And then all of a sudden, the likes of Jesse Ventura and Mean Gene and Dr. D and everybody else from the AWA does the same thing around the same time. But you obviously, you're in Memphis, you're Puerto Rico, you're everywhere at this point. You're not going to be watching WWF television every single week, of course. You've got your own things to worry about. But when did you become aware, and how did you become aware that the WWF and Hulk Hogan in particular were becoming such a powerhouse that like Hogan had all of a sudden become the biggest star in wrestling, eclipsing Dusty, eclipsing Flair, and everybody else?
Well, since I was inside the business, all the local promoters or the heads of the little territories, they knew it was coming. And it's hard to, what's that old saying? Hard to keep them down on the farm when they've seen the lights of Broadway or whatever that saying is.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing. Their production was so smooth, and it was actually fun to watch. And because here you see the WWF back in those days, they're in front of these huge houses. And sometimes they could take an arena that would seat 10,000, 12,000, and it would either be sold out or they would make it look like it was sold out. So you're watching a big event with some big stars, and they made their titles actually mean something. It's not like, a lot of places made their title like it was just like a ball they would just throw back and forth. They made their titles actually mean something. So, and when they see that production, that crowd, the talent, because all those talent were all jacked up and hooked up, and then they would see some local studio wrestling show with a guy that looked like he should be changing oil down at Olathon, and like he's getting up under the car and getting he's one of the wrestlers, there's no competition at all. So it was very easy for WWE to actually take over. And we all knew it was coming because all you got to do is just watch their TV, watch their production, watch their announcing, their interviews. It was all done first class.
Did you keep tabs on the business at that time, or did you just hear the scuttlebutt from promoters and other wrestlers?
About what?
About WWF's, impending taking over of every other territory with their fantastic production and everything else. Were you actually watching the shows occasionally?
Okay, say a local promotion was on, say, Channel 4, which was a VHF station, and you didn't have to have, you could pull it in fairly well with just an antenna. That was back in days before cable. But what WWE would do, WWF would do, they would go in there and they would buy the time. Before they was having the local promotion, they were trying to sell ads to it. So it became easier for the TV station because now, and Vince had it in his head that if I take this, I got it. If I take this station, I got it. And he would go in and he bought up all the station. He bought the time. So the TV station was making money from the get-go with WWF back in those days. And when another or the same wrestling promotion said something about it, and they said, yeah, well, we can give you the same time for X number of dollars. And they couldn't afford it. And Vince basically bought his way into these little territories and in swaths of the country by paying his way as he went.
You know that Hogan, I believe I'm right, has actually worked less dates than the other guys. I think to a point. So he wasn't working 400 days a year, going back to Japan back and forth. Although he, was going to Japan back and forth at that time as well.
How many days a year was he working?
He was claiming 400 at one point. He was living 400 days a year. Anyway, he was actually turning up to the meetings with Vince, to convince these TV stations to go with the WWF instead of the AWA or whoever it might be, or the NWA. So Hogan was really instrumental in convincing a lot of TV executives that basically the WWF was the future as well. I want to move forward, Dutch. Right, so you're Zeb Colter in the WWE. We're talking 2013, 2014. Hogan was still in with the company at that point. Did you ever have any interaction with Hogan at that point in the mid-2010s?
Not that much, other than, hey, how you doing? It's been a long time, blah blah blah. Just a greeting, and because he would, I never saw him when I left because he was going his way, I was going mine. But he would spend most of his time up around the creative bunch and with Vince, and that's where he'd be.
Do you remember the reaction when Hogan was all of a sudden persona non grata? You know, these leaked quotes that he said behind closed doors from, I think it was recorded by Bubba, the love sponge in his house, and, you know, as part of the whole record things Hogan says that, you know, we can then use against him later on down the line kind of thing. By the way, Bubba claims that the video and the videotapes were stolen from his house, and that's how they got out, and that it wasn't him who released them. That being said, do you remember that WWE's reaction? Did they say, right, from this moment on, Hulk Hogan will never be back, you can never say his name, or was it just obvious not to bring him up at that point?
I don't remember an official announcement, but basically, I think it was, you understand. I think anybody who's been with WWE for any period of time knows that there's some things, some questions you don't ask. I mean, you can ask questions, but somebody that you trust, somebody in the dressing room. But if they had anything to do with the front office personnel or Vince, you kind of kept your thoughts and your beliefs to yourself, which is the best way to do it, because then if they know too much about you, it could hurt you in the long run.
And that sort of takes us absolutely perfectly to, we're going to talk about some of the lows of Hulk Hogan. Normally there's so much more to talk about Hulk, of course, but we're just trying to go through the bits that Dutch will have first-hand knowledge in. We're going to talk about some of the lows. Of course, the last WWE appearance of Hulk Hogan with Jimmy Hart on Netflix, it was the debut episode of Netflix, it went terribly. And I think it was just years and years of Hogan. It's several things, and I'll mention it. One, he came out so strong for Trump, which is always going to alienate his politics, more divisive now than it's ever been in the history of the States and pretty much anywhere else in the world. You're going to alienate at least half of your fan base. That's that.
Absolutely. One thing I always say, and I heard this when I was a kid, two things you don't let people know if you want to stay friends with them is your religion and your politics. Keep it quiet. And some of these actors that come out and their politics, it's not what I'm aligned with, I just stop watching them. I don't, because they made it the issue, not me. But if they'd have kept it just entertaining me, and I don't know anything about their personal life or their personal beliefs, I'm fine with it. You can believe however you want to believe, but just don't tell me about it.
There was also the obviously the racist comments he made, which a lot of people didn't forgive him for. He when he returned to WWE some years later after being ousted, he, as part of like an apology to the entire WWE staff and all the wrestlers, he basically did a quick apology, and he said the main point of the thing that Hogan said was actually, just be careful what you say in front of who and make sure they're not recording you, etc., because you can never trust anybody. And everybody was like, that's the worst apology I've ever heard.
I'm kidding. Anyway. He apologized for something, said, well, yeah, but I still believe that, but I made a mistake by having somebody record it.
Yeah. It should be said that tons, like including like Booker T and The Rock and so loads of black wrestlers have come out and said, I've never even said anything racist. He's always been really good to me as well. So, you know, there's, anyway, that's their thing. But the other thing as well is like there was the Trump thing, and there's also the tall tales that I think those three things combined really just teamed up over the years to just put people off Hogan. I mean, ultimately he was sort of the he harmed his own reputation after so many years, but some of the lies were hilarious. I mean, because I've said this before. There's some of the most charming nonsense stories, apart from the fact that, you know, he's lived 400 days a year because he gained time going to Japan and then flew back, and somehow he didn't lose time back and stuff. And body slammed Andre at WrestleMania 3 and he died 2 days later. And he didn't. He died 6 years later. There's tons. because I'm on a remote thing here at the moment, I actually collated nearly 100 examples of him just making stuff up. But they're all funny, for the most part.
Oh, yeah, they are. The thing that he made the most of was slamming Andre. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Here's the thing, though.
And
That
I'll-
wasn't even the first time he slammed him. He slammed him in 79. Slammed him in Japan, probably.
Yeah, but see, if the people, unless it's recorded and played back, well, it never happened.
Hey, well, Hogan knows a lot about recording and playing back. I'll tell you that. A lot of things
Well, he
recorded
did
about
it.
Hogan that's played back. Ah, dear. I mean, ultimately, I guess he deserved the reputation he got at the end because he was sort of, as far as his public image, he didn't do himself any favors quite a few years as well, I guess. But once again, I mean, at least the lies and stuff are fairly harmless and just big, wrestler exaggerations, I suppose.
If people really wanted to put a lot of thought about it, which they won't. Okay, he said this. Oh, well, that makes him what I said he was. It makes him a racist or whatever. Or he said this about women, blah, blah, blah. If you think back in your life, a lot of people have said a lot of things that they shouldn't have said, but it wasn't recorded. And you're thinking, well, and you didn't put that much thought behind it. But when Hogan said it, or a big star like Hogan, and he was one of the biggest stars out there for a long, long time. When he said it, it was easy to attack him just by crediting whatever tape they had shown or whatever audio recording they had. So he was stuck with it. Once the people hear it, they don't forget it either. But I think it is blown out of proportion.
Yeah, I think ultimately, especially when considering there are other say-no-name, beloved wrestling stars out there over the years that have done far worse things, that have sort of been swept under the rug. I mean, you still have defenders of Chris Benoit out there.
Yeah, well, that's another example. But, I could say a lot of things I've heard some guys say, but why? They may have said it when they were mad, when they were upset, they were this, they were that. But you see, when somebody hears a story, they don't put the scene in there. They just said he said it. So once he says it and somebody credits him with saying it, well, he said it. And I don't know, that doesn't carry as much weight as something being recorded, like Huck fell victim to. But hey, we've all said things that we regretted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hulk Hogan said a lot of things that I'm sure he regretted afterwards. Things regarding like Nick Hogan and stuff. No, he said something really bad about that. But this was also at a time when he was, I guess under a lot of stress, going through a divorce. He was, I won't say addicted to, but he was taking an awful lot of pain pills just to get through the day. And he was a completely different person, I guess, at one point as well. So I always like to try and factor in those kinds of mitigating circumstances for if somebody's, not on top form or saying things that they wouldn't normally say, kind of thing, which I think is also important.
Let me ask you this. How much did he sue Gawker for?
Well,
I may have already asked you this last week.
Well, no, he sued for like 40 million or something like that, and the judge ended up awarding him something like 115 million. How much of that he actually got in the end, we don't know.
Ask me what he got.
I know you're going to say zero, aren't you?
I'm going to say close your eyes. What do you say? Nothing. That's what he got. Because they actually, bankruptcy is a way to avoid losing everything you got when they win a suit against you. So,
thing is with the Gorka trial, because we were talking about this beforehand as well. So Peter Thiel, he was the co-founder of PayPal, bankrolled Hulk Hogan secretly during the trial, and there was
he was mad at Gawker.
Yeah, he was mad at Gorka for outing him as gay years earlier, and he's like, "Well, that's no one's business but mine," and I'm not. I wasn't ready to tell people, and he was really upset with them for years, biding his time. And there's a really skewed documentary on Netflix which says that this is billionaires are running the courts and da 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 da. It's like, hang on, Gorka was a very, very wealthy company that was getting the best lawyers to go after Hogan, who was going after them, etc. And the fact was that they got outmatched financially. Hogan got the best lawyers, and Hogan ended up winning because it was a total. I mean, one, it was recorded to blackmail him, and two, no matter how it got out, it was not in the public interest. It is easily, arguably, not in the public interest. He's not a politician or anything like that, and it was all consenting adults doing their thing.
Let me ask you this. How did Hulk get lined up with Peter Thiel? Didn't Peter Thiel seek him out?
That I don't know. I suspect yes, because Peter Thiel would have seen that Gorka or Hulk Hogan was trying to take Gorka to trial, or the other way around. I don't know which way it was. But then he offered to help from there. But the thing was, it's like Gorka was about as scummy, muckraking non-journalism as you could get. And a real nasty tone for years and years and years as well. Like, if you were in the public eye of celebrity.
If you had to list, I'm going to ask you a question. If you had to list how strong Hulk Hogan was over with the people in general, worldwide, where would you place Hogan? Would you place him in the top 10?
Wrestlers or people in general?
No, just the personalities.
I don't know. He was still one of the most recognizable people on Earth, even though he hadn't wrestled in 20 years. I think most people in any country, or maybe not the majority, but enough people in every country would know who he was, whether it's South Sudan or Eritrea.
People in China knew who he was.
Yeah.
You didn't know him in North Korea. Let me say that.
Well, I don't know. I can't get in.
I don't think he's known in North Korea.
He's probably not known in North Korea because they so heavily control the media there, so probably not. All they do is apparently watch 90s movies.
Would you put him in the top 10 in the world?
I don't know if I put him in the top 10 most recognizable or biggest personalities in the world, but he's absolutely one of.
I think I would.
I think the only wrestler, and not for wrestling, that was more recognized than Hulk Hogan's The Rock. But he's probably more recognized for films than he is for the wrestling at this point.
Well, I think he was, like you said, one of the most recognizable figures in the world at one point. So, but he was good to make a trip with.
Yeah,
I heard his whole story.
We'll just end with this then. Who else can say? I think I said this last week as well. Who else can say that they were the biggest star in the WWF, WWE, WCW, AWA, New Japan? Who else can also say in the history of wrestling that they revolutionized the business twice? Once with Vince McMahon in the rock and wrestling era in the mid-'80s, once in 1996 with the NWO, because that changed everything. It's like, who else can say that? It's an amazing, amazing accomplishment.
Well, he can say it, but I can't think of anybody else who could say that. I'm agreeing 110% with you there.
Yeah. Just to sort of end it, because I know, we've said some of the negatives, a joke here and there, but
another thing is he had those two runs, WWF and WCW, but he was a babyface in one and a heel in the other. That is highly, highly unheard of. Because somebody would think, how could you be just a super, super babyface and then be a super, super heel? And his wrestling ability wasn't that good. But see, people didn't watch him for his wrestling ability.
I disagree. I thought he was a great wrestler. He didn't do much.
Oh, he was. Well, he was, because he took what he had and he made it work for him. And it was his body, it was his interview, it was brother. Because when you saw him, he was a difference. And if any other wrestler had tried to do the same thing he did, people would immediately say, "Ah, man, that's just a Hulk Hogan impression and not a very good one." So, when people walk around on Halloween dressed up like the Hulk, everybody knows who it is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how well known he was. Of course, I'm not saying something that nobody don't already know, but I enjoyed watching him. I enjoyed his interviews, uh, and I enjoyed making trips with him. I enjoyed knowing him.
I want to ask you one more thing because I think I said this last week and we got into a debate with it. Not me and you, but me and Stevie. Is I said Hogan was a great wrestler, but should I say Hogan was a great worker? Do you differentiate between the two?
Now, when you say wrestler, you're talking about in the ring. His how do you say that word? The machinery that he used in the ring didn't compare with his image and his presentation. Because when Hook presented himself, it was a full package, minus some arm drags and some slams and drop kicks. If he'd have done that, I think he'd have killed his own deal because he was just a big guy and he had all this personality and the you know to the people and he said he actually invited the crowd to participate with me, and they obliged him. They did.
We are going to mention a
What if you
couple
just
of
saw Hug do a big leapfrog, then
more
a
like a
big hip
moonsault.
toss and a head scissors and boom and a couple of arm drags, and you go, "What the hell is he doing?"
I'll see him in Japan. There's a match with like Tenru or something from 1991. He's doing insuguris and the whole bit. Everyone's never did any of that in the States. But it's not like he wasn't capable.
Well, he probably was, but I'm saying I don't know what Japan was paying him.
Good money. Amazing money.
They
And
were
he was
paying
he was a
him.
big star immediately. He was Inoki. He beat Inoki. Nobody beat Inoki practically. So he was a huge star immediately over there.
So he was. I'm searching for the right word. I mean, everybody could just look at him and see we could do something with him, which is why him bouncing around for a couple of years. But it takes, and I had a guy tell me one time, I can't remember who it was. It takes a wrestler 5 years to even learn how the business works. And I heard that I was in the business about 2 years. I went, bull crap. It don't take that long, but it does. It really does. You got to make the loop. And if you just stay in one company, you will never learn that. But if you go to two or three or four or five, I've been to 10 or 12. I've been to a lot of organizations, and you learn something different every time. Sometimes it's not good to learn some of these things, but you need to know them. And Hulk, it took him about that long to get going. But when he got going and when he developed his style, and if he wanted to wait a minute, let me ask you a question. How did he get booked back in WWF?
Oh, it's because Junior was in charge at that point. So Senior was the one, Vince McMahon Senior was the one who fired Hogan in like 80. And then by the time he fired him, yeah.
Who fired him? Vince
McMahon Senior fired Hogan
okay.
the first
Vince
time.
McMahon Senior.
Yeah, and then Junior was in power in late 83 when Hogan came back. And I think Vince Senior had died by that point.
So Junior saw him when Vince Senior brought him in and so he had all this time to think about what he would do if he had control of a Hulk Hogan for himself.
Absolutely.
So he had all that time to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And he did, and we can say a lot of things about Vince McMahon too, but one thing you can't say that he didn't know how to promote, because he knew how to promote. And I think after you do something so long and you hit a sticking point that you just don't know, it all runs together. And I think that's what happened to Vince. It all ran together at the end, and he wasn't creative anymore, and that can happen. Do you ever read any Stephen King stuff?
I've seen some films. I'm not a big reader of fiction anyway.
Well, He's made some great books, and I've read not all of them, but a lot. I've read a lot of them, but I think he finally just hit the wall. I don't think he can write anymore. I think it's all jumbled up in his head, and I don't think he's able to have the productivity and the creativity like he once had. So, but he's got more money anyway. He doesn't need to write another word. So he's like a billionaire, I think. But anyway, I think the same thing happens to bookers. It's nothing what we're talking about right now, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. This is how conversations go up and down the highway, back and forth and back and forth. And you might remember one thing I say. Didn't you say? And I said, I didn't say that. Yeah, you did. Blah, blah, blah. And if you'd have had a recorder, you could say, oh, play it back for me. Oh, yeah, I did say that. Then I have to explain myself. All right, continue.
Well, if Bubba the Love Sponge was in the car, you'd definitely have a recorder. All right, we're gonna move on.
I'm gonna go find him today.
Yeah, run him over.
And I'm gonna tell him. Yeah, I'm gonna tell him you said that.
Okay.